You know that feeling when you finally get something you've worked your ass off for? Not just bought, but earned. For me, that was apartment 4B at the Prescott. It wasn't a palace, just a studio, but it was all mine. The first space in my 25 years on this planet that didn't have a roommate's overflowing laundry basket in the corner or a parent's well-meaning but constant presence. It was the physical manifestation of my independence, paid for with late nights and endless caffeine, hunched over a glowing screen as a freelance graphic designer. I remember the first time I walked in with the keys in my hand. The agent had just left, and the silence that settled was mine. The whole place smelled of fresh paint and new floorboards. Sunlight poured through the one massive window that overlooked a quiet, tree-lined street in a part of the city I'd only dreamed of affording. My footsteps echoed on the pale wood floors. I ran my hand along the cool, quartz countertop in the kitchenette. It was perfect, clean, minimalist, a blank canvas. It was more than an apartment, it was a sanctuary. My fortress of solitude, a place where the chaos of client demands and looming deadlines couldn't touch me once I shut the door. That first week was pure bliss. I unpacked with a sense of ceremony, each book placed on the built-in shelves, each of my own art prints hung with meticulous care. I bought a ridiculously comfortable armchair, a soft gray one, and placed it right by the window. That became my spot. I'd sit there in the mornings with my coffee, watching the city wake up, feeling a profound sense of peace. I worked better than I ever had. The clean, uncluttered space seemed to unclutter my mind. At night, the building was quiet. So quiet, I'd fall asleep to the gentle hum of the city, feeling completely and utterly safe. It started, I think, on a Saturday, maybe a full week after I'd moved in. It was so faint at first I wasn't even sure I was smelling it. A little waft of something as I walked from the kitchenette to my desk. It was sweet. I paused, sniffing the air. I figured it was one of the neighbors cooking, or maybe a scented candle from the hallway. I shrugged it off and went back to work. But it didn't go away. Over the next couple of days, the smell became a quiet, persistent guest in my perfect little studio. It wasn't a bad smell, not in the way that rotting garbage or sour milk is bad. That would have been easy to locate and fix. No, this was far more unnerving. It was a cloyingly sweet scent, like a bouquet of white lilies that had been sitting in the same vase of water for a few days too long. You know that smell? It's still perfume, but there's a heavy, almost sickly undertone to it. A hint of decay masquerading as fragrance. My logical brain kicked into high gear. It had to be something in the apartment. I was a clean person, obsessive even, but maybe I'd missed something during the move. So began the great purge. I emptied my trash, even though it was only half full. I took the bag straight down to the chute in the hall. The smell remained. I bought drain cleaner and poured the entire bottle down the kitchen sink and the bathroom sink, then the shower. I scrubbed the inside of the small refrigerator until it gleamed, checked every vegetable in the crisper, every container of leftovers. Nothing. I pulled the fridge out from the wall, half expecting to find some mummified horror left by the previous tenant. There was only dust, which I promptly cleaned. Still, the smell lingered. It was a ghost. It seemed to be strongest in the evenings, a thick, sweet blanket that settled over the apartment when the air was still. It was starting to drive me insane. My sanctuary was being invaded by an invisible entity. The clean, minimalist space I was so proud of now felt tainted. A few days later, my best friend, Sarah, came over for our traditional pizza and bad movie night. It was the first time she'd seen the finished place. "Oh my God, Anne, it's gorgeous," she said, spinning in a slow circle in the middle of the room. "It's so, calm and clean." "Thanks," I said, trying to sound more enthusiastic than I felt. The smell seemed particularly strong tonight. A heavy, floral wave hit me as she opened the door. We ordered pizza, put on some terrible 80s action movie, and sprawled out on my new rug. About halfway through the movie, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know if I was losing my mind. "Hey," I said, hitting mute. "Can I ask you a weird question?" Sarah looked over, a slice of pepperoni halfway to her mouth. "Shoot, do you smell that?" She frowned, her nose twitching like a rabbit's. She took a theatrical sniff of the air. "Smell what? Pizza? Because if you're about to tell me this is a new gluten-free, cauliflower crust, non-pizza pizza, I'm leaving." "No, not the pizza," I laughed, though it felt hollow. "Something else, like flowers or something? Really sweet flowers?" She sniffed again, deeper this time, turning her head from side to side. She looked at me, her expression a mix of confusion and concern. "Anne, no, I smell pizza and your clean linen candle over there. That's it. Are you okay? You look kind of stressed." My heart sank. A cold knot formed in my stomach. She couldn't smell it. She was standing in the exact same air I was, breathing it in, and she smelled nothing but pizza and wax. "No, I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile and unmuting the TV. "Just must be my allergies acting up. You know, phantom smells. It's a thing." But I knew it wasn't a thing. Not for me. Sarah left around 11, telling me again how much she loved the apartment and how happy she was for me. I closed the door behind her and leaned my forehead against the cool wood. The lock clicked into place, a sound that was supposed to mean safety. But the enemy was already inside. Or was it? The moment she was gone, the smell seemed to intensify, as if it had been politely waiting for my guest to leave. It was no longer just a background note, it was the entire song. The sick sweetness of it coated the back of my throat. I stood there, in the center of my immaculate, obsessively clean studio. The countertops were clear, the floors were gleaming, the trash was empty, the drains were sterile. There was absolutely no source for a smell in this room. My eyes scanned every corner, every surface, desperately searching for an explanation, for some rational thing I had missed. And then, I stopped. I stood completely still and just breathed. I closed my eyes and focused only on the scent. I tried to trace it. Was it coming from the window? No, the air outside smelled of cool night and damp pavement. Was it coming from the main vent of the HVAC unit? I stood on my armchair and put my nose right up to the grate. Nothing but a faint, metallic scent of circulated air. The bathroom? The kitchenette? I walked slowly around the small apartment, like a bloodhound, sniffing. The scent was maddeningly uniform. It was everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't stronger in one place than another. It was just present. It was in the air itself. I stood there, in the middle of my perfect room, a new and terrible realization dawning on me. My heart started to beat a little faster. The smell wasn't coming from a dirty drain or a forgotten piece of fruit. It wasn't a phantom of my imagination. It was real, and it wasn't coming from anywhere inside my apartment at all. The chilling truth settled over me like a shroud. It was seeping in from somewhere else. The lock clicking shut behind Sarah was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. It was a final, damning verdict. You're alone with it now. For a moment there was just silence and the lingering, pleasant smell of pepperoni pizza and Sarah's perfume. Then, as if it had been waiting patiently in the wings for the audience to leave, the other smell rolled back in. It didn't just return, it asserted itself. The sweetness was thicker, more cloying. You know that feeling when you walk into a humid greenhouse? It was like that, but the air was laced with something that was trying to be beautiful but was failing, rotting from the inside out. I stood frozen in the middle of my perfect studio. My sanctuary, the fresh paint, the clean lines, the minimalist furniture, it all felt like a lie, a stage set for a play I didn't know I was in. My heart started to beat a low, heavy drum against my ribs. It wasn't me. Sarah couldn't smell it, so it had to be the building. It had to be seeping in from somewhere. The next few days were a special kind of hell. The smell became the new, unwanted center of my universe. Every morning, the first thing I did was throw open the big window, no matter how cold it was outside. The rush of crisp, clean city air, smelling of car exhaust and damp pavement and distant bakeries, was a baptism. For a few hours with the window open, I could pretend my apartment was normal. I could work, I could drink my coffee, I could breathe without that sweet, sickly coating forming on the back of my throat. But I couldn't live with the window open forever. And every time I slid it shut, the countdown would begin. It would take about 20 minutes. First faint, then a little stronger, and then, an hour later, it would be back at full strength, squatting in the air of my studio like a possessive entity. It was an occupation. My focus at work disintegrated. I'd be in the middle of designing a logo, deep in concentration, and a wave of it would hit me, and my stomach would just clench. I'd lose my train of thought completely. I started eating my meals standing by the open window, huddled in a sweater. I stopped enjoying the space. The soft gray armchair, my spot, now felt exposed. There was no peace here. The silence of the apartment was no longer calming, it was heavy with an unspoken, unseen presence. After the third straight day of this, of living on the edge of my own sanity, I did what any sane, terrified person in the 21st century would do. I turned to the internet. I sat at my desk, the sickly sweet air wrapping around me, and typed the words into the search bar, my fingers hesitating over the keyboard. Smelling things that aren't there. The official-looking medical sites loaded first. Phantasmia, the articles called it. Olfactory hallucinations. A shiver, completely unrelated to the cold from the still-open window, traced its way down my spine. The potential causes were a laundry list of horrors. Sinus infections, head trauma, and then the big ones. The ones that made the room feel a few degrees colder. Temporal lobe seizures, brain tumors, schizophrenia. I fell down a rabbit hole of medical forums and symptom checkers, each click pulling me deeper into a state of quiet panic. People described smelling smoke or chemicals or rotting meat. Some smelled flowers. A woman in a forum post from 2014 wrote about a constant lilac smell that preceded her epilepsy diagnosis. My throat felt tight. Was this it? Was I not being haunted by a smell, but by a malfunction in my own brain? My fortress of solitude wasn't being invaded from the outside, the saboteur was already inside. It was me. I slammed my laptop shut. I couldn't read anymore. The idea was too terrifying to entertain. A weird smell from a neighbor was one thing. A weird smell generated by my own decaying mind was another thing entirely. I stood up and paced the small floor of my studio, from the window to the kitchenette, from the desk to the bathroom door, again and again. I was a caged animal. I felt a desperate, clawing need for someone, anyone, to validate what I was experiencing. To tell me I wasn't losing my mind. That night, something new started. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, sleep a million miles away. The apartment was dead quiet. And then I heard it. Thump. It was a dull, heavy sound. It came from directly above me. It wasn't loud, just a single, muffled impact, like someone dropping a bowling ball onto a carpeted floor. I froze, my ears straining in the silence. Nothing. 5 minutes passed. 10. Just the hum of the fridge and the distant moan of a siren. I told myself it was nothing. It was a big building. People drop things. Normal life. But then, around what must have been 3 a.m., a new sound started. A low, gurgling hum. I couldn't place it at first. I sat up in bed, listening. It was the sound of water. It was coming from the pipes in the wall next to my bed, the same wall the bathroom was on. It sounded like a faucet or a shower running in the apartment upstairs. It wasn't a strong, percussive sound of a shower, but a steady, unending flow. It went on for what felt like an hour. Who runs that much water in the middle of the night? The sound finally stopped as abruptly as it began, leaving a silence that felt even more profound. The combination of the smell, the sounds, and the terror-inducing WebMD articles was too much. The next morning, fueled by coffee and a sleepless night, I called the building management. My hand was shaking so badly I had to redial the number twice. A man with a bored, gravelly voice answered. Prescott Management, Don speaking. Hi, yes, my name is Ann, I'm in apartment 4B. I started, trying to keep my voice even and rational. I just moved in last week. Right, the graphic designer. I remember. Everything okay with the move? He sounded like he was in the middle of eating a donut. Mostly, yes, but I'm calling about two things. There's a strange smell in my apartment. It's very strong, and there are some odd noises from the unit above me, 5B. I could almost hear him shrug over the phone. Ma'am, it's a pre-war building. You get noises. The new tenant in 5B is probably just settling in, moving furniture around. It's normal. It's not just moving furniture, I insisted, my voice rising a little. It's at 3 in the morning. And there's this smell. It's a very sweet smell, almost like rotting flowers. It's nonstop, and it's making it hard to be in my own home. There was a pause, and I heard him take a loud bite of something. Rotting flowers, huh? He said, his tone shifting from bored to patronizing. Look, I'll be honest with you, we can't really do anything about smells. People cook all sorts of things. Someone probably has one of those air freshener plug-in things cranked to the max. They can be pretty potent. No, it's not an air freshener, I said, my frustration boiling over. It smells like something is wrong. It smells like decay. Decay, he repeated slowly, as if the word tasted bad. Listen, Ann, I can't file a complaint against a tenant for making a sweet smell. As for the noise, if it's still happening in a week, call me back. People have a right to move their stuff around. I felt a wave of complete and utter helplessness wash over me. He wasn't listening. He'd already decided I was a hysterical, high-maintenance new tenant. Could you at least just, I don't know, have someone check the vents? I pleaded, my voice small. The HVAC was serviced building-wide 2 months ago. It's fine, he said, his patience clearly gone. Call me back if it's an emergency. A fire, a flood, a sweet smell is not an emergency. He hung up before I could say another word. I stood there with the phone in my hand, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. That was it. I had no recourse. I was completely, utterly on my own. The crazy new tenant in 4B who smells imaginary things. A profound sense of isolation settled over me, heavier and more suffocating than the smell itself. My sanctuary was now my prison, and the warden didn't believe me. I spent the rest of the day in a fog of anxiety and defeat. I didn't even bother opening the window. What was the point? The smell would just come back. It had won. I surrendered. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I just sat in my gray armchair in the dark, the lights off, watching the headlights of passing cars sweep across my ceiling. The apartment was silent. No thumps, no gurgling water. Just the smell. It was thicker than ever, a tangible presence in the darkness. It felt like I could reach out and scoop a handful of it from the air. The sweet, chemical rot of it. I gave up trying to ignore it and just let it wash over me, trying to dissect it, to understand its geography. I sat there for hours, just breathing, my mind numb. I got up to go to the bathroom, not even bothering to turn on a light. I took a step out of the main living area, into the small hallway that led to the closet and the bathroom. And that's when it hit me. It was like walking through a curtain. The smell, which had been a general miasma throughout the studio, suddenly intensified tenfold. It was a physical wall of scent. It was so concentrated here that it made my eyes water. It no longer smelled like flowers at all. It just smelled sweet and wrong, like cheap perfume mixed with raw meat. My heart, which had been beating a slow, defeated rhythm, kicked into a frantic gallop. I stood dead still in the short hallway, turning my head slowly from side to side. It was weaker toward the closet, stronger toward the bathroom. I took one slow, deliberate step toward the bathroom door, which was slightly ajar. The smell grew even stronger. Another step, stronger still. I was walking into the heart of it. I stood directly in front of the bathroom door, my hand hovering over the wood. My breath hitched in my chest. I wasn't going crazy. Phantasmia was a hallucination. A hallucination doesn't get stronger when you walk toward it. This was real, and it had a source. Slowly, I pushed the door open and looked inside. The small, white-tiled room was clean, immaculate. But my eyes were drawn upward, past the mirror, past the showerhead, to the small, square metal grate of the ventilation fan set into the ceiling. It wasn't just in the air. It wasn't coming from a neighbor's cooking or an air freshener in the hall. It was seeping, trickling, breathing down from that vent. It was coming from whatever was directly above my head. Finding the source should have been a relief. It wasn't. Standing there in the dark, the bathroom's cold tile seeping through my socks, I felt a new kind of dread, one that was sharp and specific. Before, it was a ghost, a phantasmia, a maybe I'm crazy problem. Now, it had a physical location, a point of entry. My sanctuary had a wound, and it was weeping this smell down on me from the cheap metal grate of the vent. I wasn't imagining it. That simple, stark realization offered zero comfort. It was worse. It was so much worse. My hand, trembling, found the light switch. The bathroom flickered to life, sterile and white. It was all clean, just as I'd left it. But my eyes were glued to that vent. It was just a standard, dusty, square grate. Nothing sinister about it, but the smell was pouring from it like an invisible liquid. It was a concentrated syrup of that sweet, chemical rot. I had to get closer. Looking around, the only thing that would give me enough height was the toilet. I stepped on the lid, my knees wobbling. I felt ridiculous, like a character in a bad comedy, but my heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I reached up, my fingers brushing against the cool metal of the grate. The air here was so thick with the smell I could almost taste it, a foul sweetness coating the back of my throat. I pressed my nose as close as I dared. Oh, God, it was a nauseating cocktail. The base was that overripe lily smell, but now I could pick out other notes. There was something sharp, almost like bleach or ammonia, trying and failing to cover up something else. Something fundamentally organic, something vaguely metallic. I scrambled down from the toilet, gagging, my stomach churning. I slammed the bathroom door shut, as if that could contain it. It couldn't. It was already in the walls. It was in the building's very breath. That night was the beginning of the real torment. Sleep was a foreign country I had no visa for. I lay in bed, the sheets pulled up to my chin, every muscle in my body tensed. I was listening. I didn't know what I was listening for, but my ears were straining in the dark, trying to parse every creak and groan of the old building. Around 2 in the morning, it started. It wasn't a thump this time. It was a long, heavy, dragging sound from the apartment right above me. A shake thump, shake thump, shake thump. It was the sound of dead weight. Not a box, not a piece of furniture being slid with effort. This was different. It had a wet, frictional quality to it. It sounded like someone trying to move a heavy, waterlogged rug, or a duffel bag filled with sand. It moved from the area I guessed was the living room of 5B to the area directly over my bathroom. Then it stopped. Silence. A thick, heavy silence that felt louder than the noise it replaced. Then came the gurgling again. The sound of water running, just like the other night. But now, knowing the smell was coming from the vent in there, the sound took on a sinister new meaning. The water ran for a long, long time. Not the steady hiss of a sink, but the fuller, more voluminous sound of a tub faucet, running at full blast. It went on for what must have been close to an hour. What was he doing? Washing the world's dirtiest laundry in the tub? The sound finally cut off, abruptly, and in the silence that followed, I heard the third thing. It was so quiet I thought I was imagining it. I held my breath, my ears ringing. It was a voice, a low, monotonous murmur from above. I couldn't make out any words. It wasn't a conversation. It was a steady, rhythmic, solo whispering. A litany, a prayer, a confession. It rose and fell with a strange cadence, going on and on. It was the most unsettling sound I had ever heard. It sounded like madness. I pulled the pillow over my head, but I couldn't block it out. The dragging, the endless water, the whispering. It was a sequence, a ritual, and it was happening right on top of my head. The thought of the person up there, my anonymous neighbor, began to curdle in my mind. This wasn't just someone settling in. This was something else, something deeply wrong. The next morning, I looked like hell. Dark circles under my eyes, skin pale. I'd had maybe 90 minutes of broken, nightmare-filled sleep. The smell seemed to have gotten worse overnight, as if the ritual had recharged it. I couldn't do this. I couldn't live like this. My resolve, which had been shattered by the manager's dismissal yesterday, hardened into a cold knot of anger and fear. I had to try again. I had to make them listen. I grabbed my phone, my thumb hovering over the number for Prescott Management. I took a deep breath, trying to marshal my thoughts, to sound calm and rational, not like the hysterical woman they clearly thought I was. I hit dial. The same gravelly voice answered. Prescott Management. He didn't even bother saying his name this time. Hi, Dawn. It's Ann in 4B again. A long, exhausted sigh came through the receiver. It was a sound of pure annoyance. What is it now, Ann? The situation with apartment 5B has gotten worse. Much worse, I said, my voice tighter than I wanted. There were noises all night. It sounded like he was dragging something heavy across the floor for hours. And he was running the water in his tub for over an hour in the middle of the night. Ma'am, he began, the condescension already dripping from the word. I told you yesterday, the guy is new. Maybe he works nights and he's moving his things in on his own schedule. Maybe he was cleaning. I can't tell people when they're allowed to clean their own apartments. This wasn't cleaning, I pushed, my frustration making my voice shake. And the smell is unbearable. It's strongest coming from the bathroom vent. It smells like chemicals and something rotting. Couldn't you just please send a maintenance person to check the vents between our apartments? Just to see if something died in there? A rat, or a bird? I was pleading now, offering him a plausible, non-human explanation. Anything to get someone, anyone, to just look. There was a pause. For a second, I thought he was considering it. Then he laughed. It wasn't a real laugh, it was a short, sharp bark of disbelief. A rat, right. Listen, we have an exterminator here once a month. There are no rats in the vents. And I'm telling you, no one else has complained. Not the people in 5A, not 5C, not the people below you. No one. It's just you. The words hit me like a slap. It's just you. He was isolating me, painting me as the sole problem in a building of quiet, normal tenants. My anger flared. So that's it? You're just going to do nothing? I can't sleep. I can barely stand to be in my own apartment because of the tenant you put above me, and you're going to do nothing? "There's nothing to do," he said, his voice now cold and final. "We can't evict a man because his new neighbor thinks he smells funny and drags things at night. This is New York City. You want total silence? Buy a house in the suburbs. Don't call this number again unless you see smoke or water coming through your ceiling." Is that clear? He hung up. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dead air. I wasn't just helpless. I was officially labeled. I was the crazy lady in 4B. The complainer. The one who smells things. Any future complaint from me would be instantly dismissed. He had built a wall around my problem and locked me inside it with whatever was happening upstairs. A wave of fury and despair washed over me so intensely that my vision blurred for a second. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my phone against the wall. Instead, I just sank into my gray armchair, the one that used to be my favorite spot, and felt nothing. I was defeated. There were no more moves to make. I had followed the rules, called the proper channels, and been told, in no uncertain terms, that I was on my own. My safe haven, my fortress of independence, had become a cage, and I shared it with the monster upstairs. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I didn't work. I didn't eat. I just sat there, listening to the city outside my window, a world of normal people living normal lives, completely oblivious to the small, contained horror story unfolding in apartment 4B. The sweet smell was my constant companion, a thick, cloying blanket I couldn't throw off. It was a part of the air I breathed, a part of me. Night came again, dark and absolute. I didn't even bother trying to get into bed this time. I was too afraid of what I might hear. I stayed in the armchair, wrapped in a blanket, staring into the darkness. The hours ticked by. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. The building was silent. Maybe he was done. Maybe the ritual, whatever it was finished. A tiny, foolish flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Then, at 2:17 a.m., I know because I looked at my phone, it started again. Shake thump, the same heavy, wet dragging sound. My stomach plummeted, but this time it was different. It wasn't moving from one side of the apartment to the other. It was slow, deliberate, and it was moving from the direction of his front door, across his floor, toward one specific spot. It was moving toward my bedroom. I sat frozen in the chair, my knuckles white on the blanket I was clutching. The dragging got closer and closer, until the sound was coming from directly above the corner of the room where my bed was. Right over my pillow, and then it stopped. The silence that followed was the most terrifying thing I had ever experienced. It was absolute, complete. My own breathing sounded like a discordant symphony in the quiet. My heart was a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. He had stopped right above my head. I sat there, paralyzed, for what felt like an eternity. 1 minute, 5, 10. I was staring at the ceiling, at the exact spot where the noise had stopped. My eyes adjusted to the dark. I could just make out the faint texture of the plaster. Then it came. It wasn't a thump. It wasn't a creak. It was 3 distinct, soft, deliberate taps. Tap. A pause. My blood turned to ice. Tap. It was coming from the floorboards above. From his floor. Down at me. Tap. He knew. He knew I was there. He knew I was listening. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was a message. You never really know what you're capable of until you're pushed. And I mean really, truly pushed to the edge. The thing with the tapping, that was the push. Before that, I could tell myself stories. I could rationalize. He's a weirdo, he's an insomniac, he's got a strange cleaning obsession. I mean, this is New York, right? You pay a fortune to live in a shoebox stacked on top of other people's shoeboxes. You're going to get some weirdos. But the taps, that was different. That wasn't him living his life. That was him telling me he knew I was living mine. It was a message sent directly through the floorboards. It said, I hear you. And now you hear me. After that night, something inside me just broke. The fear wasn't a visitor anymore. It moved in. It unpacked its bags. It started paying rent in my head. I became a ghost in my own apartment. I stopped walking barefoot because I didn't want the vibrations of my own footsteps to travel upwards. I started playing podcasts on my little Bluetooth speaker from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to sleep. Not music. I needed voices. I needed the sound of a normal, boring conversation about politics or movie reviews to create a buffer of noise, a wall of sound between me and the ceiling. The bathroom became enemy territory. I'd plan my trips in there like I was a soldier planning a raid. I'd wait until I absolutely couldn't hold it any longer, Then I'd sprint in, do my business as fast as humanly possible without breathing through my nose, and sprint out, slamming the door behind me. I showered at the gym. It was a 20-minute walk, a total pain in the ass, but the thought of standing naked and vulnerable under that vent, in the room where the smell was strongest, was just impossible. I couldn't do it, and the smell, my God, the smell. It was getting worse, but in a strange way. It was getting sweeter. The rot was still there, hiding underneath, but the top note was this cloying, chemical perfume. It was like he was actively trying to cover it up with something, but the mixture was so much worse than the original scent. It was a violation. It stuck to everything. I'd leave the apartment, walk 10 blocks, and I'd still smell it. I'd sniff my own sweater, my own hair, convinced the smell was coming from me. I was terrified that other people could smell it on me, that I was walking around the city radiating this aura of sweet decay. I started doing laundry every other day. I bought a new, stronger shampoo. It didn't help. The smell wasn't in my clothes. It was in my nostrils. It had seeped into the very fabric of my life. I stopped having friends over. My excuse was always that I was too busy with work, a convenient lie for a freelancer. The truth was, I was ashamed. Ashamed of the smell, ashamed of my own fear. I didn't want to have to explain it. I didn't want to see the look on someone's face, that polite confusion, when they'd sniff the air and say, I don't smell anything. I'd already had that experience. Dawn from management had made it perfectly clear, it was just me. I was the crazy one. I lived like this for almost a week. A week of podcasts, gym showers, and a constant, low-level hum of anxiety that never went away. I was exhausted. I was losing weight. I was barely working, just pushing pixels around on a screen, my mind a million miles away, always listening. Listening for the dragging, listening for the whispers, listening for the taps. But there was nothing. After that one night, the man upstairs went completely silent. No dragging, no water, no whispers. Nothing. The silence was in some ways worse than the noise. It was a coiled silence. A waiting silence. He had made his point, and now he was just waiting. For what, I had no idea. On Friday night, I finally caved. The gym was closed for cleaning, and I'd had a long, miserable day trying and failing to meet a deadline. I was grimy and sweaty and I just wanted to feel clean. I just wanted one small piece of my old, normal life back. So I decided to brave the shower. Just a quick one, I told myself. In and out. I'd keep the speaker on the sink blasting a podcast at full volume. It would be fine. I grabbed my towel and walked to the bathroom. I took a deep breath, like a diver about to go under, and pushed the door open. The podcast hosts were laughing about something, their voices tinny and fake in the tiled room. I flicked on the light. The fluorescent bulb buzzed for a second before flickering to life, bathing the small room in its cold, sterile glare. And that's when I saw it. The stain on the ceiling. It had been there before, a faint, yellowish smudge you'd barely notice. But now it was bigger. It had grown. It was an ugly, brownish-yellow shape, about the size of a dinner plate, right over the space between the toilet and the shower. The edges were darker, almost a caramel color, and they feathered out into the white of the ceiling plaster. It looked wrong. It looked sick. You see water stains in old apartments all the time. They're usually a uniform, faded tan. This one was mottled. It had depth. It looked organic. I stood there, my towel clutched in my hand, just staring at it. My heart started doing that familiar, frantic beat against my ribs. The smell in here was overwhelming, a thick syrup of chemical flowers and underlying meatiness that made my stomach churn. The podcast was still babbling on from the sink, but the sound seemed to be coming from very far away. My entire world had narrowed to that ugly brown stain on my ceiling. I told myself to get out. Just turn around, walk out, close the door, and call the emergency maintenance line. This was it. This was what Dawn had said to call for. Don't call this number again unless you see smoke or water coming through your ceiling. Well, this was it. This was my proof. This was my vindication. But I didn't move. I was frozen, mesmerized by it. And as I watched, my eyes fixated on the very center of the stain where a small, hairline crack spider webbed through the plaster, something happened. A single, dark bead of moisture began to form. It wasn't like a normal drip. It didn't gather and fall. It swelled, slowly, agonizingly. It grew from a pinprick of wetness into a fat, amber-colored drop, clinging to the plaster with a thick, syrupy tension. It reflected the fluorescent light, gleaming like a malevolent jewel. It seemed to hang there for an eternity, defying gravity. Then it let go. It fell through the air in a heavy, silent arc and landed with a soft, wet splat on the white tile floor right by my foot. It wasn't a splash. It was a splat, the sound a dollop of grease would make. The drop didn't pool out like water. It held its shape for a second, a perfect, viscous dome of amber liquid, before slowly relaxing into a sticky-looking smudge. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't look away. I watched the crack in the ceiling, my brain screaming at me to run, to get out, to call for help. But my feet were lead. Another drop was already forming, swelling, growing fat and heavy with whatever foulness it contained. And then I did something that I still can't explain. Even now, looking back, I don't know what possessed me. Maybe it was a desperate need for confirmation. Maybe my brain had just short-circuited completely. Maybe I had just finally gone insane. I held out my hand. I stretched my arm out, palm up, positioning it directly under the slowly swelling drop. The podcast hosts were still laughing. My heart was a drum solo in my ears. The drop grew, reached its peak, trembled for a moment, and then fell. It landed in the center of my palm. The sensation was revolting. It wasn't cold like a water leak would be. It was warm, tepid, and it was thick, oily. It coated my skin in a slick, slimy film. But the sensation was nothing compared to the smell. With the source of it now literally in my hand, a mere inches from my face, the smell was absolute. It was the smell of the past 2 weeks, concentrated into one foul, undeniable essence. That sickly sweet lily perfume was there, yes, but it was just a cheap mask. Underneath it was the truth. It was the coppery, metallic tang of old blood. It was the deep, sour stench of decay, the smell of tissue and fat and protein breaking down. It was the smell of death. A very, very specific kind of death. I stood there, paralyzed, a single, warm, viscous drop of human decay resting in the palm of my hand. I looked from my defiled hand up to the ugly brown stain on the ceiling. And in that one, crystal clear, horrifying moment, everything clicked into place. The dragging sound wasn't furniture. The endless running water wasn't cleaning. The whispers weren't madness. It was a process. It was a procedure. What was leaking through my ceiling wasn't a broken pipe. It wasn't a dead animal in the vents. It was the runoff. It was the fluid from whatever, or whoever, my neighbor was keeping in his bathtub. The thing he dragged across the floor. The thing he periodically washed. The source of the smell. And now, it was here. In my sanctuary. In my hand. A part of it was on me. A sound escaped my throat. It wasn't a scream, not yet. It was a choked, guttural noise of pure, biological revulsion. My hand, the one he had anointed with his filth, snapped back as if it had touched a live wire. I stared at it, at the glistening, amber film coating my palm lines. It was on me. It was a part of me. The smell, no longer a general presence in the air but a targeted assault, rose from my own skin. Blood and rot and cheap, cloying perfume. The unholy trinity of my last 2 weeks, concentrated into a single, warm, obscene drop. My brain finally rebooted, the paralysis shattered, replaced by a frantic, animal energy. I scrambled to the sink, shoving my hand under the faucet and twisting the handle as far as it would go. Cold water blasted against my skin, but it wasn't enough. I grabbed the bar of soap, a cheap, scentless block I kept for washing my hands, and started scrubbing. I scrubbed with a violence that frightened me. I wasn't just washing, I was trying to scour away the memory, the touch, the very idea of it. The soap turned into a pathetic lather, unable to fight the oily residue. I dug my fingernails into my palm, scraping at the skin, trying to physically remove the layer that had been contaminated. The skin turned red, then raw. It started to sting, a clean pain that was a welcome alternative to the defilement I felt. All the while, the podcast on my speaker was still playing from the counter. The hosts were laughing about a bad movie they'd seen. Their cheerful, oblivious voices were a grotesque soundtrack to my private horror. It was an insult, a violation of the moment. With my clean hand, I lunged for the speaker and slammed the power button, plunging the bathroom into a sudden, roaring silence broken only by the sound of the gushing tap and my own ragged, panicked breaths. This is it. This was the proof. This was real, not in my head, not a weird smell from the vents. Not my imagination. It was a physical substance, leaking from the ceiling, from him. The thought of Don from management, his condescending smile, his placid dismissal of my concerns, flashed in my mind. Don't call this number again unless you see smoke or water coming through your ceiling. Oh, I had water for him. I had something so much worse than water. My feet carried me out of the bathroom before I even made a conscious decision to move. I left the water running, a hysterical, wasteful torrent that I couldn't bring myself to turn off. It felt like a barrier, a cleansing sound that held the silence at bay. I stumbled into my small living area, my eyes darting around the studio I had so carefully curated to be my safe space. It felt tainted now, the air itself felt thick, poisoned. My sanctuary had been breached from above. My phone, I needed my phone. It was on the little kitchen island where I'd left it. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it twice. The screen lit up, a bright, unforgiving rectangle in the dim light. I fumbled through my contacts, my thumb slipping on the glass. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, irregular rhythm that made me feel dizzy. I found the number for building management, the emergency line. I pressed the call button, my entire body humming with a terrifying mixture of adrenaline and vindictive rage. The phone rang once, twice, then a tired, annoyed voice answered. Building services, this is Frank. I didn't wait, I didn't introduce myself. The words just came pouring out of me, a high-pitched, hysterical torrent that didn't even sound like my own voice. There's something coming through my ceiling. In the bathroom, it's a liquid, a brown liquid, and it smells, my God, it smells awful. You have to come up here right now. Apartment 4B, you have to get up here. I was shouting, almost screaming into the phone, tasting the metallic tang of panic on my tongue. Ma'am, calm down, Frank's voice said, laced with the weary patience of a man who has dealt with 1,000 overreactions. What kind of liquid? Is the ceiling about to collapse? I don't know if it's going to collapse. It's dripping. From upstairs, from 5B. You have to. I never finished the sentence. Ram. The sound was so loud, so sudden, so violent, it felt like it shook the entire building. It came directly from above. It wasn't the sound of something falling over. It was heavier. It was the sound of a large, heavy object being overturned with immense force. Like a bookcase being thrown down, or a full bathtub being knocked on its side. It was a sound of absolute chaos, of something breaking apart. I went silent. Frank on the other end of the line was saying something. Ma'am? Hello? What was that noise? But I couldn't hear him. I had lowered the phone from my ear, my entire being focused on the ceiling. And then came the next sound. The unmistakable creak and slam of an apartment door being thrown open. Not just opened, but flung open, crashing against a wall. It was immediately followed by footsteps. Heavy, pounding footsteps on the floor above me, moving with a speed that was pure flight. They weren't walking, they were running, a frantic, thundering stampede. Thump, 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 thump across the floor of 5B, and they weren't heading for the elevator bay. I knew the layout of the building. They were heading for the fire stairs. He heard me. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. It stole the breath from my lungs. My call, my screaming into the phone. He had heard every word through the floorboards. Through the vents. He knew that I knew. He knew he was discovered. My blood ran cold. I was no longer just a witness to a strange phenomenon. I was a participant. I was the reason for the ram. I was the reason for the running. I had, with my own panicked voice, set this thing in motion. Frank's tinny voice was still squawking from my phone. Hello, ma'am? Is everything okay? I killed the call without a word. My hand dropped to my side, the phone feeling impossibly heavy. The pounding from upstairs had stopped. It was replaced by a new sound, closer now, echoing in the concrete stairwell just outside my apartment. Thump, 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 thump. The sound of someone sprinting down the stairs, taking them 2 or 3 at a time. A desperate, panicked descent. He was coming down. He was going to pass my door. I was frozen in the middle of my living room, a statue carved from ice. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, to lock myself in the bathroom, but I couldn't move. My feet were welded to the floor. All I could do was listen to the approach of the monster I had just awoken. The footsteps grew louder, more frantic, a drumbeat of terror getting closer and closer. Then, on pure, morbid impulse, I moved. I didn't run away from the door. I ran towards it, ran on the balls of my feet, my breath held tight in my chest. I reached the solid wood of my front door, my sanctuary's final bastion, and pressed my eye to the peephole. The fisheye lens warped the sterile hallway into a curved, distorted tunnel. It was empty for a split second. Then, a figure burst into view from the direction of the stairwell. It was a man. He was thin, gaunt almost, with a wiry frame lost inside a dark gray hoodie and jeans. His hair was lank and greasy, plastered to his forehead with sweat. He was carrying nothing, his hands were empty, but it was his face, even distorted by the lens, that will be burned into my memory forever. His eyes were wide, wild with a terror that mirrored my own, but his was the terror of the hunted, of the cornered animal. His mouth was a tight, grim line. He looked like a man whose entire world had just collapsed. He was moving fast, a blur of gray fabric and frantic limbs. He was almost past my door, heading for the main exit at the end of the hall. But then, for a single, heart-stopping second, he faltered. He turned his head, his wide, panicked eyes locked directly onto the peephole of my door. He couldn't see me, I knew that, but he looked right at the spot where my eye was pressed. It wasn't a casual glance. It was a look of acknowledgement. A look that said, "You. It was you. You're the one." The expression wasn't just panic anymore. In that split second, I saw something else flicker in his gaze. Something dark and hateful. It was the venomous glare of a creature whose nest had been disturbed. The moment lasted an eternity but was over in a flash. He broke eye contact, turned, and practically threw himself at the heavy fire door leading to the main stairwell and the exit. The door swung open and he disappeared through it. Slam! The sound of the heavy door closing echoed down the now empty hallway. And then, silence. A silence so profound, so absolute, it was louder than any of the noises that had preceded it. The running was gone. The man was gone. The only sound in the entire world was the rush of blood in my own ears and the forgotten gush of water still pouring from my bathroom faucet. I remained pressed against the door, my eye glued to the peephole, staring at the empty, silent hallway. My body was racked with shivers, the adrenaline beginning its slow, painful retreat, leaving behind a cold, nauseating dread. He was gone. The immediate danger had passed. I was safe, locked in my apartment. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that just one floor above me, in the silent, waiting apartment of 5B, the secret he had been keeping, the source of the smell and the whispers and the rot, was still there. He had fled, but he had left it behind. And I was directly underneath it. Alone. I stood there for a long time, my eyes still pressed to the peephole, long after the heavy thud of the fire door had faded. The silence he left behind was a physical thing. It pressed in on me, heavy and suffocating. It was the silence of a vacuum, of a world that had held its breath for too long and was now blue in the face. The only sound was the one I'd forgotten, the frantic rush of water from the bathroom sink, a sound that now seemed hysterical, like a person babbling senselessly after a traumatic event. My legs finally unlocked. I stumbled back from the door, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a sob that was trying to claw its way out of my chest. I felt violated. My sanctuary, my perfect, clean, minimalist sanctuary, had been fundamentally broken. The peephole I'd looked through for safety had become a window to a monster. The floor beneath my feet felt thin, fragile, a mere layer of plywood and plaster separating me from it. I had to turn off the water. The thought was small and mundane, but it was an anchor. A task. I walked on stiff legs into the bathroom, the scene of the original sin. The air was still thick with that sweet, sickening smell, now mixed with the metallic tang of my own fierce sweat. My palm still throbbed where I'd scrubbed it raw. I twisted the faucet handle, and the roaring gush of water died with a final, gurgling sigh. The silence that rushed in to replace it was even worse. It was the silence of the apartment above me, the waiting silence. That's when I heard the new footsteps. Not the frantic, panicked sprinting of the man in the gray hoodie. These were slower, heavier, echoing up the main stairwell. Official footsteps. My mind, still sluggish with shock, pieced it together. Frank, the building services guy I'd screamed at on the phone. He must have sent someone. A sharp rap on my door made me jump so violently I nearly screamed. Building security. A voice called out, muffled but firm. I didn't want to open it. The man had just run past that door. The hallway was contaminated ground. But what was the alternative? To stay here, alone, a floor below a corpse? I crept back to the door, my heart a frantic bird beating against my ribs. I looked through the peephole again. This time it was a man in a navy blue uniform. He looked bored and overweight, his hand raised to knock again. I fumbled with the locks, my fingers clumsy and weak. When I pulled the door open, the security guard, his name tag read, Gary, took a half step back. I must have looked insane. Wild eyes, pale face, my whole body vibrating with a tremor I couldn't control. "Ma'am, you the one called about a leak?" he asked, his voice flat. Words failed me. I just pointed a shaking finger upwards. Upstairs, 5B, he just ran. A man. He heard me on the phone with Frank. He ran. Gary's expression shifted from boredom to mild concern. Okay, slow down. What man? Who ran? The one from 5B. The one making the smell. I knew how crazy I sounded. But then his eyes drifted down to the floor just inside my bathroom, where a small, dark, syrupy puddle was forming, having dripped from the ceiling while the water was off. And I think, for the first time, the smell from my apartment hit him. That cloying, floral rot smell. His nose wrinkled, the condescension vanished, replaced by a flicker of genuine alarm. "Stay right here, don't go back in your apartment. Lock the door behind me," he said, his voice suddenly all business. He pulled out his radio. "Frank, you there? Yeah, it's Gary. You need to get the cops to 225 Larchmont. Apartment 4B, the leak she called about, it's not water. And you need to come up here. Now." He strode down the hall and I did as I was told, shutting and locking the door, my back pressed against it as if I could physically hold the world at bay. It was only a few minutes, but it felt like hours. I heard the elevator ding, and then more voices in the hall. I risked the peephole again. Frank was there now, along with Don, the building manager who'd brushed me off. Don's face, usually set in a smug, patronizing smirk, was pale and tight. They were all staring up at the door of 5B. The secret was out. Soon, the hallway was filled with people who weren't supposed to be there. 2 uniformed police officers arrived first, then a pair of detectives in plain clothes. The building became a different place. The quiet, residential corridor was now a stage. Yellow tape was stretched across the entrance to the hallway. My home was officially a crime scene. A female officer, young and with a kind but firm face, knocked on my door and asked me to step outside. "We need to secure the area, ma'am. You can't stay in your apartment for now." So I stood there, in the cordoned-off section of the hall, wrapped in a blanket someone had given me. I watched them work. Other residents peeked out of their doors, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. I was the center of it all, the girl from 4B. The girl who smelled things. I watched as the detectives conferred. I heard snippets of their conversation. No answer. Exigent circumstances. Let's not wait for a warrant. They were going to go in. My stomach churned. I both desperately wanted them to and was terrified of what would happen when they did. They didn't use a battering ram. It was quieter, more methodical. One of the detectives worked on the lock with a set of tools. The sound was a series of small, sharp clicks, each one ratcheting up the tension in my own body. Finally, a loud, definitive clunk echoed in the silent hall. The lock was breached. One detective pushed the door open a few inches and stopped. He didn't even have to go in. That's when it hit us all. The smell, not the faint, ambiguous sweet scent I had been living with. This was the full, unbridled, soul-shriveling stench of death, unleashed from its prison. A wave of putrescence washed over the hallway, so thick you could taste it. It was the smell of lilies, yes, but lilies that had been used to wrap a dead animal and had then rotted along with it. I heard one of the uniformed cops gag. Don, the manager, actually turned and dry-heaved into a potted plant near the elevators. I felt a strange, bitter vindication. "See? I wanted to scream. I told you, I'm not crazy." The senior detective, a man with graying hair and tired eyes, stepped into the apartment. He was in there for less than a minute. When he came back out, his face was a stony mask, but his eyes told the story. He walked over to me. "Ma'am, my name is Detective Miller," he said, his voice low and even. "I want to thank you for your call. You were right to be concerned." He paused, choosing his words. "We've found the source of the problem. There's a deceased individual in apartment 5B. In the bathroom." I just nodded, my teeth chattering under the blanket. The words hung in the air. Deceased individual, a polite, clinical term for something horrible. It was real, all of it. The sound of dragging, the whispers, the dripping. It all clicked into place with a nauseating finality. The relief that followed was overwhelming. It was a dizzying, light-headed sensation, like I'd been holding my breath for 2 weeks and could finally let it out. He was gone. The man in the hoodie, the monster, had fled. The secret was discovered. It was over. I was safe. The next few days were a blur. I gave my statement. I stayed with my friend, Sarah, who now looked at me with a mixture of horror and pity. The building management put me up in a hotel, telling me the apartment needed to be professionally sanitized. I knew I could never go back there. The memory was etched into the walls. I spent my days in a daze, trying to force my life back into its normal shape, but it was like trying to put a shattered vase back together. The cracks would always be there, but at least, I told myself, the danger had passed. About a week later, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Is this in Kowalski?" a familiar, tired voice asked. "This is she, Ms. Kowalski. This is Detective Miller. I was hoping you could come down to the 14th precinct. We have some follow-up questions. And there's something I think you should see." The station was exactly as you'd imagine. The smell of burnt coffee, the drone of computers, the weary bustle of a place that deals in the worst parts of humanity. Detective Miller led me to a small, windowless interrogation room. He offered me a coffee, which I declined. He sat down across from me at the metal table and sighed, rubbing his face. "First, an update," he said. "The victim in 5B was the registered tenant, a man named Michael Bell. He'd been dead for about 3 weeks. Cause of death is still pending, but we know he was drowned in his own bathtub." I swallowed hard, picturing the bathroom above my own. "Our suspect," he continued, "the man you saw running, we believe is named Clark. Just Clark. No last name yet. Seems he was an uninvited guest of Mr. Bell's. After killing him, it appears he just lived there, with the body. The sheer sickness of it made me feel cold." "Did you catch him?" Miller shook his head. "Not yet. He's in the wind, but we found some of his things he left behind, including this." He slid a large Ziploc bag across the table. Inside was a cheap, spiral-bound notebook. The cover was plain black. "We think it's his journal," Miller said, his voice dropping a little. "The first half is disturbing. He writes about Mr. Bell. He writes about the process. About using lye and a cocktail of chemicals to try and dissolve the body in the tub. When that didn't work fast enough, he started buying flowers. Lilies. Huge bouquets of white lilies. To cover the smell, my blood ran cold. The flower shop. The man with the lilies. It was him. But that's not why I called you here, Ms. Kowalski," the detective said, his eyes meeting mine. They were filled with a gravity that terrified me. About halfway through the notebook, he stops writing about Michael Bell. And he starts writing about you. I couldn't breathe. The air in the room suddenly felt thin and sharp. "Me?" He calls you, the girl downstairs. He documents your routine. He knew when you left for work. He knew you went to the gym on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He wrote down that you sometimes listened to true crime podcasts in the evening. Miller's face was grim. He noted that you seemed quiet. That you were a clean slate. His words. I stared at the notebook in the plastic bag, my mind reeling. The noises, the whispers, they weren't just random sounds of a man trying to hide a body. He was listening to me. He was learning me. The breach of my sanctuary had been far more profound than just a leaky ceiling. He had been invading my life, my privacy, my very existence, from above. The relief I had felt for the past week, the belief that I was a random bystander, crumbled into dust. "He was watching me," I whispered, the words weak and hoarse. "He was," Miller confirmed softly. He then opened a file folder and took out a photocopy of a page from the notebook. He slid it across the table so it was directly in front of me. It was the last entry. The handwriting was a rushed scrawl, angry and jagged. It was dated the day of my call to building management. The day he ran. Detective Miller leaned forward slightly, his voice barely above a whisper as he read the words aloud for me. The words that would be burned into my brain forever. "The chemical smell seems to be leaking through. She's noticing. Might be time for a new lily."